But when we come into the presence of God, when we come to church, we don't come for comfort. We come to worship God. You know, on the first Sabbath of each month, to illustrate the diversity of our world church and of our local church, we try and have someone read from a different language. And after about maybe a year, I don't know how long of doing this, we're about to run out of languages. So we're repeating one today. We're going to be reading in Spanish again. So if you speak a language and we have not read from that language yet, let me know and we'll have you reading our scripture next month. But today we're going to be reading in Spanish again. Amner's going to do that.
Primera de Corintios 10, capítulo 10, versos 11 y 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, versos 11 and 12. No murmuréis como algunos de ellos murmuraron y perecieron por el destructor. Estas cosas le acontecieron como ejemplo y están escritas para amonestarnos a nosotros y a quienes han alcanzado los fines de los siglos.
You know, before we get started in this message, I want to give credit where credit is due. Actually, someone pointed out this message, or a portion of this message, a large portion of it, from another pastor, and I was blessed by it. And I thought, well, I'm going to take that sermon, I'm going to make it mine. And so it's been greatly updated and changed, but it's from a couple years ago, but I was blessed by it, and I want to share a message with you today that touched my heart. But I'm going to start out with something very different. I want to begin by reminding you that we as Seventh-day Adventists are a part of a world church. We here in Lexington are part of something that is much, much bigger than who we are locally, right? Our mission locally is to reach this area of Kentucky, but we're also a part of a movement that Jesus has given, a message that Jesus has given us to give to this whole world. It's a very specific present truth message that we've been entrusted to give to this whole world before Jesus comes, I believe, very soon in the clouds of glory with all the heavenly angels and with God the Father himself. What that does is it puts us in a precarious position, because it gives us a double duty. One, we have the personal preparation that we have to be doing to be prepared to meet Jesus ourselves. And it also, we've been given a public proclamation that we're to be making to the world. And so it's our duty to share this last day, again, present truth message. If we don't, when Jesus comes, we're going to be found wanting. And I want to give you a little bit of church organizational information now. Some of you be very familiar, some of you, oh, I didn't know that. But as I said, we're a part of a worldwide church body. We were made up first of local churches, like the Lexington Seventh-day Adventist Church. Then we're made up, the local churches are made up into conferences, and then into unions, and then into divisions, which makes up the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, which is the worldwide church of Seventh-day Adventists. And so we here in Lexington are part of the Kentucky-Tennessee Conference. The Kentucky-Tennessee Conference is a part of the Southern Union. The Southern Union is a part of the North American Division, and the North American Division is, of course, a part of the General Conference. And one of the good things about the Seventh-day Adventist Church is that we are a bottom-up, if you will, ruled church. It's not top-heavy down, it's bottom-up. And so the most power, so to speak, is found in the local church body in the Seventh-day Adventist organization. But even though we have most of the power at the local level, we are not a congregational model of church governance. That is, we don't keep all of our money locally. We do keep some of it, but it's part of the tithe, and the tithe goes to support the worldwide mission of Seventh-day Adventists. And so, also, we don't come up with our own doctrines. Me or any other preacher in a Seventh-day Adventist church can't get on a wild tangent or something and go on it and convince the congregation of that, because we have as Seventh-day Adventists, we subscribe to what we call the 28 fundamental beliefs of Seventh-day Adventists, if indeed we are truly Seventh-day Adventists. If we don't subscribe to those or agree with those, then really we are only Seventh-day Adventists in name only. Now, another fact about that distinguishes us from the congregational model is that we have representatives from each division and from each conference and from all over the world, and they go to the GC in their council sessions, and they deal with the major issues and concerns that come up in the church. And that kind of keeps us at the local church level safe from a pastor, again, that goes haywire and comes up with his own ideas and leads his congregation into following that, because there are measures in place by the world church to help get that pastor, that church on track. Now, as a part of a worldwide organization, since we have our own representatives that represent us, and we send our views by them to the GC sessions, the worldwide church, we have agreed to submit as a local church, Seventh-day Adventist church, we will submit to the conclusions that the leaders of the GC sessions and councils come up with. That is, after all, very biblical. In the New Testament, when they had some issues in the church, they would call together the GC, if you would. They would call together all the churches. They would have a big council of the churches. And when they did that, they would bring those issues there. And then those councils would come up with conclusions. They would send them back to the local churches. And so if the local church, whether it be then or the conferences or unions or whatever it is today, if we didn't do that, if we were not willing to continue on like that, ultimately we would have anarchy. So we have to be watchful of those who don't wish to stay in harmony with the world church, because even with the best intentions, that rebellious spirit will ultimately lead to division, which is antithetical against the quarterly we're studying right now about unity. But that's not the only issues that we have to deal with. In the time that we live now, there's a multiplicity of things that calls for our attention. We've got these distractions that pull us from our posts. We've got these discouragements that drag down our hearts. We've got duties that demand our time. And on top of all those things, we have what the Bible calls savage wolves among us. It says here, Acts 20, verse 28 and 29, "Therefore take heed to yourselves and to all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers, to shepherd the church of God, which he purchased with his own blood." And listen, "For I know this," Paul said. He didn't say, "I think this," or "this is a possibility." He said, "I know that after my departure, savage wolves will come in among you, not sparing the flock." So let me tell you, as your local pastor, that text keeps me up at night sometimes. I've been given a solemn responsibility that I take seriously, to keep one eye open all the time, to be watching out for these wolves that come in sheep's clothing. And sometimes I feel like I've got to be a voice crying out in the wilderness, wake up, get ready, Jesus is coming, watch out. And in today's modern church, we face a number of things that have been brought among us to divide us and distract us and to tear us apart. And in the passage we're going to look at today, we're going to just address one of 5 things that are brought up. Paul points us back to an Old Testament book. He says, I want you to look at this. But before we go there, I want to invite you, if you would, please pray with me. Father, again, I want to pray for your Holy Spirit. We live in serious times. We live in the time of the end. We live in the time when Jesus is about to come. And so I pray, Lord, that your Holy Spirit will be doing the work in us. As we talked about last week, you promised in Philippians 1:6 to finish the work that you've started. But I'm praying, Lord, that we are in harmony with you, in harmony with your word, that we are seeking to surrender our all to you. And so today, Lord, we want to open your word, and as we do that, we are always in desperate need of your Holy Spirit. And so we're asking you to send it in great measure today. In Christ's name, amen. Go with me, if you would, to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 1 through 6, and then verse 11. 1 Corinthians 10, verses 1 through 6, and verse 11. We've got a lot of scripture today. We've got a lot of quotes I'm going to share with you today. I'm reading from the New King James Version. It says this: "Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that our fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, all ate the same spiritual food, all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them, God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became our examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted." Now go with me to verse 11. "Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come." Notice the passage says, it ends with, "upon whom the ends of the ages has come." So who is this passage speaking to? Those living in the last days, upon whom the ends, us, right? Do we believe that? This passage is for us. And so what's an admonition? An admonition is a warning. And so what Paul does is he brings up the experience of Israel, and he says, I don't want you to be unaware of something. He says, just because our fathers came out of Egypt together, just because they were baptized together, and they fellowshiped together, and they went on the same outreach experiences together, and they all graduated from Andrews or from Southern, that doesn't mean they're all going to make it into the kingdom. So Paul wants to counsel and to encourage and admonish the church. And you think, well, why does he want to admonish? Is it because he wants us to feel bad about ourselves? No. Paul wants us to be saved. He wants to see us in heaven. So he is talking very plainly and very openly about the issues that he knows that the church in our day is going to face. And so those that live just before Jesus comes, he says, you need to be aware of some things. I'm going to steer you back to where I want you to look. And when you see those things, I don't want you to repeat those things. Are you with me? You understand where we're at today? In the passage that we read, it's interesting that that we're about to read, Paul lists 5 experiences and he applies those to us now, but we're only going to have time to deal with one of them. We may have time and another time to come back to some of the others, but God was saying through Paul, I want to reiterate, my church will struggle with these issues in the last days, and if they are not clear on these issues, most of them are going to be lost in the wilderness. They're not going to make it to the promised land. They won't be ready when Jesus comes. And you know why the Apostle Paul said that many of the children of Israel didn't make it to the promised land? Hebrews chapter 3, verse 18 says, they could not enter because of unbelief. Now, some translations have it as unbelief. Some translations put they could not enter because of disobedience. And what we try and do often is we try and separate obedience and faith. We try and separate faith and works. But if we have faith, I'm going to be obedient to God, right? If I have faith, I'm going to serve the Lord. If I have faith, I'm going to obey the Lord. And so if we are not obeying the Lord, if we're not following His Word or seeking to follow His Word, we got to quit kidding ourselves and telling ourselves that we have faith, because we really don't. And this word is rightly translated, either one of these, unbelief or disobedience. But the Greek word is apistia, which we get the English word apathy from. Now, they entered not in then, you could say they entered not in because of their apathy. They were too spiritually lazy to get up and to make a decision to stand for the right when the time came. And he said most of those were lost. They were scattered in the wilderness. Now, it's not because they didn't believe, because they did. They simply wouldn't act on what they believed on and what they knew to be truth. And today we're going to look at a subject we've looked at a couple of times this year. We're going to look at the golden calf experience again. And we're going to do it because Paul told us to look there. It's the story of that calf, and it's written for our admonition, as Paul says there in 1 Corinthians. So those of us living in the last days, he said, we should be able to look at this story, and we should be able to draw some things from that story of the golden calf that will be specifically and especially applicable to us today for those in the church before Jesus comes. Let me give you a little background. If you'll go to Exodus chapter 32, please. Exodus 32, and I'll give you a little background as you're turning there. What's happening here is God has brought the people out of the land of Egypt, as we know. He's gathered them together in Exodus chapter 12 at Mount Sinai. There he proclaimed to them his law, he proclaimed to them his statutes and his judgments, and then all the people entered into covenant with God. We called it now the Old Covenant. So they entered into covenant with God, and in Exodus 19 through 23 you'll find all of that information. But then God invites Moses and Nadab and Abihu and 70 of the elders. He says, I want you to come into my presence. We're going to eat a sacrificial feast to commemorate this covenant that we've made, and that's in Exodus chapter 24. And from there, the Lord calls Moses to come up even further onto the mountain and to give him the tables of stone, the 10 Commandments, and the instructions for the tabernacle and its services. And so as Moses went up there, when he was delayed, he was there for quite a while apparently, and while he was on the mountain, God didn't give a time frame. When God called him up, he didn't say, hey, you guys, I'll be back in 3 days or 2 days. He was given no time frame. And so after some period of time, we don't know how long, Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and those 70 elders, they figured we better, we don't know when Moses is coming back, so we better get down among the people. And so they did. And so this is where it leads to the point we're at in Exodus chapter 32. Now, fasten your seatbelts. We're going to read the entire 35 verses of this chapter. Exodus chapter 32, beginning in verse 1. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, when the people saw what? That Moses was delayed from coming down the mountain. Keep that in your mind. It says, the people gathered together Aaron and said to him, come make us gods that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. And Aaron said to them, break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. Now some commentators speculate that Aaron asked for their ornaments and jewelry because he thought that they would refuse to give it to him and then he'd have his out. They're not following along with the plan that I have, but he knew how hard it was for some people to get rid of that stuff. Only this time, they were all too willing to part with their ornaments. Look in verse 3. So all the people broke off the golden earrings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. He received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool and made a molded calf. Then they said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out. And this is the Israelites are saying this. This is not Aaron. Then they said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. And so when Aaron saw it, he built an altar before it. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow is a feast to the Lord. Now, before we go any further, I want to draw your attention to at least a couple of things here. When Aaron saw this, when he saw that this thing met the approval of the people, he says, let's go with it. This is working. Let's go with it. And it says he proclaimed a feast to who? Who does it say? How does the word in your Bible appear there? All capital letters, at least in the King James Version, right? And that's what translators do with what theologians call the tetragrammaton. And when a Hebrew wrote the name of God, the official name of God, they wouldn't include the vowels. They just wrote YHW in our language, transliterated in our language. And some people added the vowels and they come up with Yahweh, and some have come up with Jehovah. But when you find the word Lord capitalized in your Bible, it is the proper name of the God of heaven. And so it's important to understand that when they made this feast and they built this calf, Aaron was not proclaiming a feast to Apis, the bull god in Egypt, but to the Lord God himself. So he's saying everything we're about to do, it may be different from what we're accustomed to, but we're going to be doing this to the Lord. And so this is kind of what Aaron's doing. In verse 6, then they rose up early on the next day, offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Now, we don't have much time, but if you do a little research on the word play, you'll find that it doesn't mean tag. It has some sexual, immoral implications, and that's the meaning of it. Verse 7, the Lord said to Moses, go, get down, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. They have turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded calf and worshipped it and sacrificed to it and said, this is your God, O Israel, that brought you out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and indeed it is a stiff-necked people. By the way, I was stiff-necked all day yesterday. I slept and got a crick in my neck, and so this morning I'm still a little nervous it's going to hurt, so I might turn a little bit. It's all right now. But anyway, he says this is a stiff-necked people. Verse 10, now therefore let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, and I will make of you a great nation. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but some people read this and they say, well, why is God so ready to destroy all of these people he just went to such lengths to bring out of Egypt? And let me answer that question with a question. Did God have to ask Moses permission to destroy the people of Israel? No. Obviously, he did not. He didn't have to ask Moses, get out of the way, and I'm going to wipe these people out. So why was he doing it? God was testing Moses, I believe, to see if Moses was going to intercede for the people. God wanted to see if Moses was just a hireling or if he was a true shepherd that was watching out for his flock. That's what I believe God was doing here. If God had wanted to destroy them, he would have just wiped them out. So when he said, get out of the way and let me do this, it was an appeal to Moses, and Moses then interceded for the people. Look in verse 11. Then Moses pleaded with the Lord his God and said, Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians speak and say he brought them out to harm them, to kill them in the mountains, and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce wrath and relent from this harm to your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants to whom you swore by your own self and said to them, I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and all this land I have spoken of I will give to your descendants, and they shall inherit it forever. Verse 14, so the Lord relented from the harm which he said he would do to his people. And Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the two tables of the testimony were in his hand. The tablets were written on both sides. On the one side and on the other they were written. Now the tablets were the work of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. And when Joshua heard the noise of the people as they shouted, he said to Moses, there's a noise of what in the camp? War. Now it doesn't take a theologian to figure out that if your worship sounds like war, something's probably not right. Right? Verse 18, but he, Moses, said, it's not the noise of the shout of victory, nor the noise of the cry of defeat, but the sound of singing I hear. So it was, as soon as he came near the camp, that he saw the calf and the dancing. So Moses' anger became hot, and he cast the tablets out of his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. And then he took the calf which they had made, burned it in the fire, ground it to powder, and scattered it on the water, and made the children of Israel drink it. And Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that have brought so great a sin upon them? 22. So Aaron said, do not let the anger of my Lord become hot. You know the people. They're set on evil. For they said to me, make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. And I said to them, Aaron said, whoever has any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me, and I cast it into the fire, and this calf came out. Now that's a likely story, isn't it? Listen to me. One of the tendencies we have is that when we read the stories in the Old Testament is that we want to remove them far from us today. But that is exactly what Paul is saying don't do. He says, look at this story. You who live in the last days, the Laodicean church, look at this story and see how you can apply it to your life. So that's what we're trying to do here today. You know, we don't worship gold. We don't worship calves. Who would think to say we would throw gold in the fire and a calf came out? Well, let me tell you, as a pastor, I hear some similar far-fetched reasoning as to why I'm going to do what God says explicitly not to do. I'm going to go ahead and do it, and I think it's okay, and God's going to be okay with it. Now, I'm going to be bold with you today, if you hadn't already noticed. You know, I think it's just that we don't hear the Word of God preached anymore, and when we do, it kind of shocks us. I know I'm married to another man, but why would God let me fall in love with this other man if he wanted me to stay married to this one that I'm married to already? I mean, God said it's not okay, but how would I have been miraculously preserved even though I was doing what I know he told me not to do? I know I shouldn't marry someone who is not of my faith, but I love him and he loves me, and it's going to work out all right. Here's what Aaron tells Moses. He says, look, I put gold in the fire. This calf just popped out. It was a miracle, so God must be in it. Verse 25, when Moses saw that the people were unrestrained, parenthetically it now says, for Aaron had not restrained them to their shame among their enemies. In other words, this sexual dancing and nakedness and the things they were doing around this golden calf, the other nations were observing, they were seeing what was going on, and it brought shame to the God of heaven from what his people were doing. Verse 26, then Moses stood in the entrance of the camp and said, whoever is on the Lord's side, come to me. All the sons of Levi gathered themselves together to him. And he said to them, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let every man put his sword on his side and go in and out from entrance to entrance throughout the camp. And let every man kill his brother, every man his companion, and every man his neighbor. So the sons of Levi did according to the word of Moses, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. Then Moses said, verse 29, consecrate yourselves today to the Lord, that he may bestow on you a blessing this day, for every man has opposed his son and his brother. Verse 30, now it came to pass on the next day that Moses said to the people, you have committed a great sin, so now I'll go up to the Lord, and perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. Then Moses returned to the Lord and said, oh, these people have committed a great sin and have made for themselves a god of gold. Yet now, listen, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, I pray, blot me out of your book which you have written. The Lord said to Moses, whoever sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. Now therefore go, lead the people to the place of which I have spoken to you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I visit for punishment, I will visit punishment upon them for their sin. Verse 35, so the Lord plagued the people because of what they did with the calf which Aaron made. This is the longest story that Paul has us refer back to and apply to us as an example for those living in the last days. And I want to point out a few things from this story that kind of stick out. And one of the first things that sticks out is that it all began when the coming of Moses was delayed. When Moses was on the mountain longer than they expected, that's when the people began to get in mischief. Brothers and sisters, as Seventh-day Adventists, we have been saying for many, many years that Jesus is coming when? Soon. It's a word we don't like to use much anymore because, in fact, I've heard people say, why do we still use that word? Because we've been saying for over 170 years that Jesus is coming soon. And the point with the children of Israel is that when Moses didn't come as soon as they thought he would, they began to lose their focus. And remember, we're reading from Exodus 32 because Paul said, those who live in the last days, look at this story and be admonished. In Matthew 24, Jesus speaks of the last days, and he talks about a class of servants that were waiting for the master's return, and it said that the master's return was delayed. And he calls these servants evil servants. And he says that these evil servants begin saying something in their heart. Does anybody remember what they said? What did the wicked servant begin to say in his heart? My Lord delays his coming. And when the evil servant begins to say this in his heart, that Jesus isn't coming soon, that his master is delayed, he's not coming like I thought he was, you know what the Bible says in Matthew 24? What he begins to do? He begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with the drunkards. You see, when he loses his focus on why he is here and what his purpose is, he begins to caught up with and drawn into the things of this world. And the more he's drawn into it, the more he gets involved with the things of the world, the more attractive they become, right? Isn't that the way it is? Of course it is. So it was with the children of Israel, and I believe the same, of course, is true with us today. And I want to be very plain with you. When we begin to get involved with and connected with the world, things just won't seem things that used to seem bad to us won't seem as bad anymore. We may find ourselves saying, I don't know why I used to be such a stickler about that, or why I used to be bothered by that. It's really not so bad. And you know why we say that? It's because we have become inoculated to it. We have submerged ourselves. We've done it so often. We've watched it so often. We've been a part of it so often. It just doesn't seem bad to us anymore. And so Jesus has tarried longer than we expected. We become careless and inattentive. Notice this statement from Testimonies, Volume 5. It says this, speaking of this evil servant, it said he was a servant outwardly devoted to the service of God, while at heart he had yielded to Satan. He does not, like the scoffer, openly deny the truth, but reveals in his life the sentiment of the heart, that the Lord's coming is delayed, and presumption renders him careless of eternal interest. What does presumption mean? Presumption means that we think that God is too good, He's too loving, He's too kind, He's too long-suffering, that He would not possibly exclude me from His kingdom. We become careless and inattentive, and we begin careless of eternal interest. Notice this. Speaking of the evil servant again, he accepts the world's maxims and conforms to its customs and practices. Selfishness, worldly pride, and ambitions predominate. As he alienates himself from the people of God, he unites more and more with the ungodly. He is found eating and drinking with the drunken, joining with worldlings and partaking of their spirit. Thus he is lulled into a carnal security and overcome by forgetfulness, indifference, and sloth. What happens when you're lulled? We have lullabies, right? What are they for? Put kids to sleep. So when we become lulled, we kind of go to sleep. We start to go to sleep. And so we get so intimately connected with the things of this world that we're not even aware that the soon coming of Jesus is about to happen. Now notice that these Israelites in this careless, indifferent state, they begin to demand a different style of worship. The people turn to the building of the golden calf, and this is probably going to be the most obvious part of the story. And again, remember, Paul said, you in the last days, the Lexington church, take note of this. They wanted a style of worship that was more in harmony with their worldly hearts. A style of worship that was more in harmony with what they were accustomed to. A style of worship that would make the mixed multitude feel more comfortable with them as they joined them. You know, when we talk about worship in the church, a lot of time we say, well, it's just a matter of culture. My culture is different than your culture. And there are some things, wearing shoes and different things that certainly are different. But brothers and sisters, don't miss the point. When we come to Christ, the Bible says that your culture is now the culture of heaven. It's no longer the culture of this earth. This world is not our home. We're pilgrims and strangers. And when a person begins to be at home in the world and its culture, then they want the church to be and to feel more like what they're accustomed to, right? Because that's where our heart and where our mind is. Listen to this. Aaron had thought that Moses had been too unyielding to the wishes of the people. He thought that if Moses had been what? Less firm, less decided at times, and that if he had made a compromise with the people and gratified their wishes, he would have had less trouble and there would have been more peace and harmony in the camp of Israel. Let me tell you, brothers and sisters, you cannot purchase peace at the price of compromise. You cannot purchase peace at the price of compromise. You know, we've had this sort of thing going on, forgive me for saying, in the North American division for a long time now. Here in the West, this part of the world, we have bought into the culture around us, and we've baptized it, and we've brought it into the church. And so we want to change our church worship service to be more seeker-sensitive. Another term I've heard is the word safe church. We want people to feel safe at church. But what does that mean? What does that mean? Aaron had a new idea. Look at what it says. The quote continues. He therefore had been trying this new policy. He carried out his natural temperament by yielding to the wishes of the people. Let me tell you something. I would much rather yield to the wishes of the people than ever have anyone mad at me. That's just a fact. Most of us are that way, right? We'd rather just go along with the crowd. Don't worry about it. I'm doing good. And sometimes I think pastors, you think, well, those pastors say stuff to try and make us mad. Believe me, I'd rather say anything else. I'd rather say anything else. But I can't stand before God one day and look Jesus in the face if I just say the things that please the people. And I can't look you in the face. Aaron tried out this new thing thinking that he was being kind, he was being merciful to the people. So he, along with the advice of the people and the consent of the people, he designed this worship service to meet their perceived needs. And you know that our perceived needs are often not really what our real needs are? There are a lot of things that I want as my perceived need, or you might want as your perceived need, but it's really not what you need, right? It's interesting in verse 6 that they went out and they had this worship service. But did you notice the sacrifices they had in verse 6? They had these two sacrifices. The Bible said they had what? What's the first one? What? Burnt offerings. And the second one was what? Peace offerings. What's missing? Sin offerings. Sin offerings. No sin offerings here, because sin offerings make people feel uncomfortable, because telling people they're sinners is not politically correct. I was one of my districts, a few districts ago, I was preaching some sermon, and I said, rightly so, that everybody in this building is a sinner. I had a guy, he got furious with me, got up and walked out because I said he was a sinner. I was including myself, of course, as well. Let's don't have a sin offering, he said. It might offend the people. And as they start coming down the mountain, Moses and I guess Joshua's the only one now at this point. He was still waiting, I guess, on the side of the mountain. And so Moses and Joshua are coming down. He says, there's a sound of war in the camp. And Moses says, no, it's not the noise of the shout of victory or the noise of the cry of defeat. He says, in other words, he said, they're not hot and they're not cold, they're comfortable. We're not going to talk about sin because that wouldn't be comfortable. We want our church to be relevant. Man, the Bible is always relevant. In the 1st century or the 21st century, this book is always relevant. I don't have to twist it, change it, turn it, do anything with it because it is always relevant. That will never cease to be. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I heard a pastor that recently said that we come to church as pastors and we wear these suits and the suits make people feel uncomfortable. He said that our worship service shouldn't make people feel uncomfortable, so we need to tone things down some. We need to throw out the ties, we need to throw out the suits, and we need to get casual. Now, listen to me, brothers and sisters. There's one word that I don't ever hear in the context of the worship of the living, almighty, holy God, and that is the word casual. When we come into the presence, and I'm not telling you need to be wearing a suit. I'm telling you I need to be wearing one. But when we come into the presence of God, when we come to church, we don't come for comfort. We come to worship God, the almighty, holy God. Ellen White has some interesting comments about this worship of the calf. Patriarchs and Prophets 3:20. As they drew near their encampment, they beheld the people shouting and dancing around their idol. It was a scene of heathen riot, an imitation of the idolatrous feasts of Egypt, but how unlike the solemn and reverent worship of God. Seventh-day Adventists, we don't seem to understand that this has been happening in our own church for the last 20 years at least. I've been in the church about 26 years. It's been happening 20 years or longer that in many ways we're imitating the churches of Babylon. Some of our greatest ideas about worship are ideas that we have borrowed from people that have turned their backs on the law of God. That ought to make us think. Verse 6, it says that when they came to worship, it says they rose up early. I'm debating this one. I bet it was the first time some of them got up early in time to get to Sabbath school. Peace. Peace. The Bible says they rose up early. What does that say? What does that tell us about the people? They liked what was happening. They were willing to get up early and be there for that because they liked what was going on here. There's an assumption today that if something draws out the crowds, it must be worthy of emulation. Whether it's worth the use of food or music or some other form of entertainment like skits or concerts or whatever it is, as long as the people come, that is all that matters. You know what's really sad is that there are churches that have capitalize on that idea far better than we have. Churches like Willow Creek Church, you've probably heard of it. The whole mindset of the Willow Creek Church was that they were going to treat church like a business, and they were going to market it like a business, and they were going to speak to the people in the communities and find out what the people in the communities enjoyed, what they liked, and they were going to make church just like that. Now listen, hear me on this. It's not so bad to ask a converted person who knows and loves Jesus what they would be interested in, but when you go and ask a bunch of people who don't know and don't love Jesus, what do you want to do for church? That's not a good idea. Willow Creek has over 20,000, almost 30,000 people that come to worship on Sunday mornings. And for years, brothers and sisters, Seventh-day Adventists were sending their pastors from Andrews. They were sending their seminarians. They were sending people from the conferences to Willow Creek to learn how to do church. Here's the amazing thing. In Christianity Today magazine, in an article called Willow Creek Repents, Bill Hybels admits they had been doing and marketing church in the wrong way all those years. They said that it did draw out the crowds. They had plenty of people coming, but the crowds were not getting spiritual. The crowds were not becoming spiritually developed, mature Christians who loved and served and obeyed Jesus. Greg Hawkins was the executive pastor, and they had a lot of pastors. He said this, and this is referring to the methodology that did not work. He said, participation is a big deal. We believe the more people participating in these sets of activities with higher levels of frequency, it will produce disciples of Christ. Now, let me clarify something about last weekend. I wanted a lot of participation, right? We wanted the church packed. But it wasn't for these reasons. I didn't think that's going to make spiritually developed disciples of Jesus by packing the seats here in the church. I thought if we can get those people in the door, it's going to open their hearts and their minds to a willingness to see, hey, they worship Jesus. When we invite them to something else that shares present truth or some other things, then they'd be more open to responding to that invitation. You know, it's sad to find that they realized this methodology didn't work, but they had spent multiple millions of dollars and years of pastoral staff working towards those goals you have on the screen there. And even more sad is the fact that some of these churches, like Willow Creek, have come out openly and repented of these methods and that we have copied from them, and we continue to do those same methods. I'm hearing almost daily now of how people think our church should focus on social justice. What? What? Jesus gave us our marching orders, and they were not to be marching for gay rights or women's lib or taking down our borders. Jesus treated people with love and concern no matter what gender, no matter what color, no matter what language. He showed us how to treat people, and he treated everybody equally with as much love. But he never said, I want you to become social justice warriors for the cause. We should demonstrate the same love and concern that Jesus did for everyone that comes in that door, but we should not get sidetracked into our churches becoming these social justice centers. This church ought to be about the gospel. It ought to be about sharing the last day present truth message with this community, not the fact that we're promoting women's lib or whatever it might be. Shame on us. Man, I'm getting worked up. Take a breather here. You know, the people, they were telling Aaron, they said, make us a worship service similar to what we're used to. And when he did, it drew the crowds, and they were out early. They came for the coffee. They came for the donuts. They were ready to go when it was time for the service. Notice this, Testimonies, Volume 6. If you lower the standard in order to secure popularity and an increase in numbers, I think this is in your bulletin, and make this increase a cause of rejoicing, you show great what? Blindness. Let's lower the standard so we can be more relevant to the community. We can reach more people. Hey, look at that. We got all the people coming now because we don't preach anything anymore. I heard one pastor say, we have mastered the art of almost saying something. Brothers and sisters, I believe it's time to preach the word. Look, if numbers were evidence of success, Satan might claim the preeminence, for in this world, his followers are largely in the majority. It's the virtue, intelligence, and piety of the people composing our churches, not their numbers, that should be a source of joy and thankfulness. Another element from this story, it's not readily seen in Exodus chapter 32, but if you back up on the screen here, when we to Exodus 12, verse 38, it says, a mixed multitude went up with them also. The Bible says that when Israel left Egypt, a great mixed multitude went with them, and I've heard them called Israelites. They're Egyptians in Israel. Israelites. And you know the old story, the old saying, you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy, right? Right? Notice, this mixed multitude had been the first to indulge in murmuring and impatience, and they were the leaders in the apostasy that followed. Another quote. In this multitude were not only those who were actuated by faith in the God of Israel, the true followers, but also a far greater number who desired only to escape from the plagues, who followed in the wake of the moving multitudes merely from excitement and curiosity. This class were ever a hindrance and a snare to Israel. In other words, some of them, they were in it for some other reason other than the worship of the true God. And because they were there, they became a hindrance and a snare to God's people. You think, well, what is the connection to us today? What would be the last day admonition for today? After all, that's what Paul's told us to do, right? To look at this example and draw some conclusions for us today. Do we think there's a mixed multitude in the Seventh-day Adventist Church today? Do we have Israelites among us? People who in their hearts are really not committed to being Seventh-day Adventist Christians. It's the same mixed multitude that's behind the modern push for redefining what we believe and how we do worship and whether we're subject to the world church and their decisions. Listen, the accession of members who have not been renewed, in other words, the increase of members who have not been renewed in heart and reformed in life, is a source of weakness to the church. This fact is often ignored. Some ministers and churches are so desirous of securing an increase in numbers that they don't bear faithful testimony against unchristian habits and practices. I run into that as a pastor. You know that, right? People want to be baptized, or they make decisions to be baptized, and we're going through and looking at the things that we teach and believe as a church, and I find that they're not ready. They're not in harmony with what we teach, or maybe they really haven't consecrated their lives to Christ, the best I can tell. But usually they find themselves out of harmony with what the Bible teaches, and I can't, in good conscience, as a pastor, baptize those people. Why? Because they become a snare. Those who accept the truth are not taught that they cannot safely be worldlings in conduct while they are Christians in name. Good place for an amen. Heretofore, or before now, they were Satan's subjects. Henceforth, they are to be subjects of Christ. The life must testify to the change of leaders. Little self-denial or self-sacrifice is required in order to put on a form of godliness and to have one's name enrolled upon the church book. Hence, many join the church without first becoming united to Christ. In this, Satan triumphs. Such converts are his most efficient agents. They serve as decoys to other souls. New people get mixed messages when they see things that the Bible prohibits, and they see the longtime members who still are doing those things. The problem with the mixed multitude was not that they were sinners, because we're all sinners, right? The Israelites were sinners as well, right? You know, you've heard the saying that the church has to be a hospital for sinners, but no one goes into the hospital expecting when they leave the hospital to be in the same condition that they entered the hospital, right? Everybody, hear me on this, everybody ought to be admitted into the hospital. We shouldn't say anybody, you're not dressed right, you don't smell right, you don't whatever, you can't come to our church. Of course not. Nobody should be prohibited from entering the hospital. But if they enter, they shouldn't expect to leave the same way they came in. You know, if I cut myself accidentally and have a gaping hole in my arm, I go to the hospital. When I leave there, I'm hoping it's going to be sewed up and fixed, right? I'm not thinking I'm going to go to the hospital and come out with a gaping hole in my arm. And so that's the church. The mixed multitude, they had no desire to follow Jesus and to be transformed in his likeness. They wanted to escape the plagues that God had been pouring out on their people, rather than submitting to the removal of the plague that was within them. Here's the last point I want to look at from this story. The sympathy of the people was with the wrong leader. They wished that Aaron could be the leader rather than Moses. And the Bible says that in the last days that the people will have itching ears, and they're going to heap up to themselves teachers who are going to preach and teach what they want to hear and what they want to, they prefer, rather than what they need to hear. And the sermon that I hear and I like the most, I'm saying, yeah, rah, 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 is probably the one I need the least. But the one that I'm sitting here, I'm kind of cringing a little bit about, that, oh man, that's probably the one that I need the most. Listen, Aaron was a people pleaser. Speaking of Aaron's natural desire to please and to yield to the people led him to sacrifice the honor of God. The people thought Moses was too rigid. He was too intolerant of new ideas. Aaron, on the other hand, he's more in touch with the people. And so do you think those people were crying out, we want a leader that's faithful to God? Think again. Listen to this. They thought they had a general who just suited them, speaking of Aaron. So finally, God sent us the right pastor for the church, or now we've got the right general conference president now. And it goes on. They were ready to do anything that he suggested. They sacrificed to the golden god. They offered peace offerings and gave themselves up to pleasure, rioting, and drunkenness. They were then decided in their own minds that it was not because they were wrong that they had so much trouble in the wilderness, but the difficulty, after all, was with their leader. He was not the right kind of man. He was too unyielding and kept their sins continually before them, warning, reproving, and threatening them with God's displeasure. A new order of things had come, and they were pleased with Aaron and pleased with themselves. They thought, if Moses had only been as amiable and mild as Aaron, what peace and harmony would have prevailed in the camp of Israel. They cared not now, listen, whether Moses ever came down from the mount or not. Listen to this one. When Moses, on returning to the camp, confronted the rebels, his severe rebukes and the indignation he displayed in breaking the sacred tables of the law were contrasted by the people with his brother's pleasant speech and dignified demeanor, and their sympathies were with Aaron. Brothers and sisters, listen to me. This ought to be a warning to every one of us. What it's telling us is that the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. We have a leader in our world church now that is a godly man that stands for the right, and he takes a stand for it. He's standing for our long-held biblical beliefs of our church, and he's being called popish for doing so. We have leaders in our division that are promoting division against the world church. Listen to what we've been counseled. There have ever been in the church those who are constantly inclined towards individual independence. They seem to be unable to realize that independence of spirit is liable to lead the human agent to have too much confidence in himself and to trust in his own judgment rather than to respect the counsel and highly esteem of the judgment of his brethren, especially of those in the offices that God has appointed for the leadership of his people. God has invested his church with special authority and power which no one can be justified in disregarding and despising, for he who does this despises the voice of who? God. We don't have time to go any further into that. Go to the next quote. Look with me. To justify himself, speaking of Aaron, we get this in the story because Moses, we read from the scripture, he says, what did they do to make you treat them this way, to sin in this way? And Aaron said, the people, You know how they are? They're selfish. They're self-centered. In today's language, we would say Aaron threw the people under the bus. So to justify himself, Aaron endeavored to make the people responsible for his weakness and yielding to their demand. And notwithstanding this, they were filled with admiration of his gentleness and patience. Hey, go ahead, throw us under the bus because you let us do the things we want to do. Notice this. The people were charmed with Aaron's lovely spirit and were disgusted with the rashness of Moses. Let me tell you something. If you hadn't recognized it yet, Aaron didn't love the people. He was what Jesus would call a hireling. He wasn't a shepherd. Moses did, what did Moses do? Unbeknownst to these people who were rebelling against him, who didn't even care whether he came down from the mountain or not, he was interceding for them. He's saying, Lord, if you're not going to save these people, scratch me from the book of life. Moses spent 40 more days. He's already been on the mountain for 40 days. He comes down for a day or whatever it is. He's back on the mountain for another 40 days. And the people were like, we want Aaron. We want Aaron. Brothers and sisters, we're living in the last days. The Apostle Paul says, don't repeat what Israel is doing, what Israel did. And I hope in this sermon that you've seen some connections. You'll recognize how the devil is going to try and undermine us and take our crown. In any way he can get it from you, he's going to try and take it. We've got to be aware of his devices. The Bible gives us these admonitions so we don't repeat those mistakes and we don't fall for those things anymore. We're encouraged to keep our eyes on Jesus, to be focused on his word. And if it's not in harmony with his Christ and his word, if it's not in harmony with the spirit of prophecy, don't trust your own judgment. Trust the Lord. Trust his word. I want to end with a quote from God's Amazing Grace, page 332. It says, warning, admonition, promise, all are for us, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Therefore let us not sleep, as do others, but let us watch and be sober. Watch against the stealthy approach of the enemy. Watch against old habits, natural inclinations, lest they assert themselves. Force them back and watch. Watch the thoughts. Watch the plans, lest they become self-centered. Watch over the souls whom Christ has purchased with his own blood. Watch for opportunities to do them good. If you draw close to Jesus and seek to adorn your profession by a well-ordered life and godly conversation, your feet will be kept from straying into forbidden paths. If you will only watch, continually watch unto prayer, if you will do everything as it is if we were in the immediate presence of God, you will be saved from yielding to temptation and may hope to be kept pure, spotless, and undefiled till the last. If you hold the beginning of your confidence firm unto the end, your ways will be established in God, and what grace has begun, praise the Lord, glory will crown in the kingdom of our God. Jesus is about to come. Jesus is about to come, brothers and sisters. Paul gives us some admonitions to steer us away from the ways of this world to the ways of Jesus and his word. And I say it again, Jesus is coming soon. I want to be ready when Jesus comes. And I know you want to be ready too, right?